Before machines came to define the battlefield, Imperial Japan built its war on something older: human bodies. Muscles, discipline, and endurance were treated as strategic resources, just like steel or oil. Across Asia and the Pacific, the empire relied on manpower to construct airfields, ports, roads, and fortifications, often under brutal conditions and unforgiving timelines. Japanese military doctrine placed deep faith in the strength of the soldier. Industry existed, but machinery was scarce, fuel was limited, and logistics were stretched thin across vast distances. Where American planners asked how many machines were needed, Japanese commanders asked how many men could be spared. And usually the answer was more. On islands captured across the Pacific, entire construction projects were executed by hand. Runways were carved from coral using picks and shovels. Earth was moved basket by basket. Trees were cut, dragged, and shaped without mechanized saws. A task that might take hours with heavy equipment instead took weeks, but it was done through sheer human effort. This approach was not seen as backward. To Japanese leadership, it was honorable. Endurance was a virtue. Suffering was expected. The ability of soldiers to work day and night without complaint was proof of loyalty to the emperor. Exhaustion was not a failure, it was evidence of devotion. In China, Southeast Asia, and on Pacific Islands, this system expanded further. Prisoners of war and forced laborers were added to the equation. Human labor became an expendable tool. Men collapsed from hunger, disease, and heat, and were replaced without pause. Progress mattered more than survival. By 1944, Japanese commanders had grown accustomed to measuring productivity in bodies. A road required hundreds of workers. An airstrip required thousands. Time was measured not in efficiency, but in how much suffering could be endured before collapse. This worldview shaped how Japanese officers judged their enemy. They believed the Americans lacked discipline. They assumed Western soldiers were physically weak, dependent on comfort, and unwilling to suffer. Machines, in their eyes, were substitutes for spirit. What they did not yet understand was that machines were not a weakness. They were a force multiplier, and a brutal one. When the first American engineering units arrived with bulldozers and graders, Japanese observers watched with confusion. They saw a single machine perform the work of hundreds of men. No shouting, no lines of exhausted laborers, just steel, fuel, and relentless movement. In that moment, the foundation of Japan's manpower empire began to crack. Because no amount of courage could compete with an enemy who turned time itself into a weapon. And for the first time, some Japanese commanders realized the truth. This war would not be decided by how much suffering a nation could endure, but by how efficiently it could replace it. The first sign that something was different did not come from gunfire or bombs. It came from noise, a deep mechanical growl cutting through jungle silence. Japanese observers, trained to watch for enemy troops and artillery, struggled to understand what they were hearing. This was not an attack. It was construction. When American forces landed on Pacific Islands in 1943 and 1944, they brought something the Japanese military had rarely faced before: engineering units equipped with heavy machinery. Bulldozers, graders, cranes, and trucks rolled ashore alongside infantry. To American planners, this was routine. To Japanese commanders, it was unsettling. Within hours of securing a beachhead, the Americans began reshaping the land. Coral was crushed under steel blades. Jungle was cleared in straight, deliberate lines. Roads appeared where none had existed. What would have taken weeks of manual labor was accomplished in days, sometimes in a single afternoon. Japanese doctrine had never treated construction as a combat function. Fortifications were built slowly, quietly, and by hand. Engineering was something done before the enemy arrived. The Americans shattered that assumption. They built while under fire. Machines moved forward even as shells fell nearby, operators working with the calm precision of factory labor. One Japanese officer on Saipan later wrote that the bulldozers disturbed him more than the tanks. Tanks could be destroyed, machines could be burned, but the process did not stop. Another bulldozer would arrive. Another crew would take over. Progress was relentless. American engineering units did not rest when soldiers rested. They worked at night under floodlights. They repaired roads as fast as they were cratered. If a bridge was destroyed, a new one appeared the next morning. If an airstrip was bombed, it was operational again by dusk. To Japanese commanders watching from concealed positions, this was a psychological shock. They had measured war in terms of endurance and sacrifice. The Americans measured it in output and time. Where Japan spent lives to move Earth, America spent fuel. On Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the pattern repeated. As soon as ground was taken, machines followed. Artillery positions were prepared with mechanical speed. Supply routes hardened into permanent roads. Airfields emerged almost overnight, bringing fighters and bombers closer to the Japanese homeland. This was not merely engineering. It was domination of the environment itself. The Americans did not adapt to the terrain, they replaced it. For the first time, Japanese officers began to understand that they were facing an enemy who did not rely on human limits. Fatigue did not slow steel. Hunger did not weaken engines. Losses did not halt momentum. The bulldozer became a weapon. The road became an attack. And every hour saved by machinery translated into days lost for Japan. By the time Japanese commanders fully grasped what they were witnessing, it was already too late. The unexpected enemy was not the American soldier alone. It was the system that followed him ashore, reshaping the battlefield faster than any army built on human labor ever could. The Japanese commander stood on a ridge overlooking the captured ground, watching in silence. What he saw did not resemble war as he understood it. No formations of soldiers, no lines of laborers hauling earth by hand. Instead, a single American machine moved back and forth across the field, its steel blade biting into the soil with mechanical indifference. It was a bulldozer. In the Imperial Japanese Army, moving earth meant manpower. Hundreds of soldiers assigned to dig trenches, level ground, or clear jungle with picks and shovels. Progress was slow, exhausting, and measured in days. Here, in front of him, one machine was doing the work of an entire battalion. The bulldozer roared forward, pushing coral and dirt aside as if the land itself offered no resistance. Trees fell in minutes. Rocks that would have broken men's backs were rolled away without effort. Within an hour, a usable road had begun to form, straight, wide, and deliberate. Japanese observers tried to calculate what they were seeing. To match that output, they estimated it would take nearly 300 men working in shifts. Men who would need food, rest, and protection. Men who would slow under fire. The bulldozer needed none of that. It did not tire. It did not hesitate. It simply continued. American engineers worked with practiced routine. One man guided the machine. Another checked the blade. Fuel trucks arrived on schedule. When the bulldozer paused, it was not from exhaustion, only to refuel before resuming its advance. For the Japanese command, this was not just an engineering surprise. It was a strategic revelation. If one machine could replace hundreds of soldiers, then entire assumptions about labor, logistics, and defense were suddenly obsolete. On islands like Saipan and Okinawa, this imbalance multiplied. Dozens of machines worked simultaneously, transforming beaches into airfields and jungle into supply roads. Positions that Japanese forces had assumed would take weeks to construct were completed by the Americans in a day. The psychological impact was devastating. Japanese doctrine prized endurance and sacrifice. Here was an enemy who bypassed endurance entirely. Steel replaced muscle. Fuel replaced blood. One officer later admitted that watching the bulldozer convinced him the war could not be won. Not because of firepower, but because of production. Japan could train soldiers, could not manufacture time. The machine kept moving. The road grew longer, and with every meter of earth pushed aside, the meaning of the war changed. This was not a battle of courage against courage. It was a contest between human limits and industrial momentum. And standing on that ridge, the commander understood the truth. When one machine equals 300 men, the outcome is no longer decided on the battlefield, but in the factories thousands of miles away. The Japanese commander did not speak at first. He simply watched. From his position above the newly carved road, the scene below unfolded with an efficiency he had never witnessed in his military career. American machines moved in sequence, each task flowing into the next as if rehearsed. Trucks arrived exactly when needed. Engineers worked without urgency, yet nothing was delayed. For years, he had believed victory belonged to the side willing to sacrifice more men. The Imperial Army had proven that belief time and again in China, in the early Pacific campaigns, in the brutal contests of attrition. Losses were expected. Endurance was doctrine. But what he was witnessing did not ask men to endure. A bulldozer cleared ground faster than entire companies he once commanded. Portable cranes lifted loads that would have required days of coordinated labor. Prefabricated materials appeared as if summoned from nowhere. What his army built through suffering, the Americans assembled through planning. The commander began counting not machines but consequences. Every machine meant fewer soldiers needed at the front. Every completed road meant supplies arriving regardless of terrain. Every airstrip carved from jungle meant aircraft that could not be challenged. The Americans were not fighting the land. They were rewriting it. He understood then that bravery was irrelevant against such momentum. His soldiers could hold positions, but they could not stop the future from arriving. Even if an attack succeeded, another road would be built. Another airfield would rise. Losses were replaced not by training, but by factories thousands of kilometers away. He thought of his men. Many were exhausted, undernourished, still loyal, still willing. But loyalty could not produce steel. Courage could not summon fuel. And no amount of discipline could make time slow down. Reports confirmed what his eyes already knew. American production was accelerating. Ships, aircraft, vehicles, numbers that dwarfed anything Japan could field. The war was no longer decided by tactics or even battles. It was being decided by capacity. For the first time, the commander allowed himself a forbidden thought. This war cannot be won. Not because his soldiers lacked spirit. Not because his plans were flawed. But because the enemy fought with a system that did not bleed the way men did. Destroy one unit, and 2 more arrived. Delay one project, and 10 others continued. As night fell, the machines below did not stop. Lights came on. Work continued. In that quiet moment, the commander understood the cruel truth of modern war. The side that replaces men with machines does not need to ask how much sacrifice is enough. The answer is always more. And Japan no longer had it. By the final years of the war, it was no longer clear where the battlefield truly was. Fighting still raged across islands, skies, and seas, but the outcome was being decided far from the front lines. Inside factories, rail yards, shipyards, and assembly lines that never slept. The real weapon of the war was not a rifle, a bomber, or a battleship. It was industrial power. The United States did not simply fight the war. It manufactured it. Every American soldier who landed on foreign soil was backed by an invisible army at home. Millions of workers, men and women, produced weapons faster than enemies could destroy them. Tanks rolled off assembly lines in days, not months. Aircraft were built in numbers that made losses almost irrelevant. Ships were launched, sunk, and replaced before the enemy could adjust. For nations that still believed war was won by bravery and sacrifice, this was something entirely new. Japan and Germany planned wars around decisive victories. They believed speed, discipline, and skill would break their enemies before resources ran out. But the Americans planned for endurance. They designed a system that assumed losses and absorb them without slowing down. If a tank was destroyed, another was already on its way. If an aircraft failed to return, 3 more took its place. If a ship was sunk, a newer one followed behind it. Industrial power removed fear from the equation. Factories were reorganized to eliminate wasted motion. Standardized designs replaced complex craftsmanship. Parts built in one state fit machines assembled in another. Civilian industry became military infrastructure almost overnight. This scale reshaped the psychology of war. American commanders could afford to take risks. They could push forward knowing supplies would arrive. Engineers could build airfields in jungles, ports on empty shores, roads through terrain once considered impassable. War became a logistical operation first and a combat operation second. For their enemies, this was devastating. No matter how successful an attack appeared, it never felt final. Victories failed to change momentum. Destroying American equipment became meaningless when replacement arrived faster than reports could be written. The battlefield stopped being a place of exhaustion for one side and became a place of attrition only for the other. By 1944 and 1945, the imbalance was undeniable. Industrial output had become destiny. The war was no longer about who fought harder, but who could replace destruction faster than it occurred. And only one nation could do that at scale. In the end, the most powerful weapon of the war never fired a shot. It hummed, stamped, welded, and assembled, day and night, turning raw material into inevitability. When the shooting stopped, that same industrial power would rebuild the world. That was the final lesson of the war. Steel, logistics, and production decide conflicts long before the first soldier reaches the front. And once that weapon is unleashed, no amount of courage can stop it.